Hey there. In this lecture, we're going to be talking about biodiversity and how evolution creates biodiversity. So, if we're talking about evolution, we have to go back to the beginning. And in the beginning, you can see we have the tree of life. In the beginning is our last universal common ancestor. Even before that, we believe that there was life on Earth, but there is one common ancestor that unites all of life on Earth that has the same genetic code that we still have today, that all of life has today, and we call that Luca. And so we believe that life on Earth has been around for 3.5 to 3.8 billion years. And that is an immense amount of time for life to change. Evolution can happen quickly and it can happen slowly. And small changes over time will lead to large changes. And so sometimes we see these really large changes, like, for example, a dog-like organism that ran on land, becoming a whale, which is a swimming mammal in the ocean. That's a big change. But in order for that big change to happen, there had to be many, many, many small changes. And those small changes, we call those microevolution. We call that microevolution. And we can see microevolution within a lifetime. So we see that with resistant bacteria, because we use antibiotics at such a fast rate. We have changed the environment for bacteria enough that it can adapt. And so we've seen changes in the population over our lifetime. Same with the peppered moth. That change from the dark color, from that light color to the dark color. That's a microevolution, or a small change. A macroevolution change, like I said, is from, let's say, from the ambulocetus to the Dirodon to the whale. It takes many, not just a million years, but millions of years, many millions of years for changes like that to happen. And sometimes it's hard for us to wrap our heads around those macro changes, but we have to remember that those changes take such a long time, and 3.8 billion years is such an immense amount of time for so many small changes to add up. And when a species changes enough over time that we say that it has become a new species, we call that speciation. And so a new species has been created or has formed when we say that it can no longer breed with others of its kind and to produce a fertile offspring. So we look at a lion and a tiger that produced the really cool animal liger. And at some point there was speciation occurred in a feline where one cat couldn't reproduce with another to produce a successful offspring that could breed. So a liger can still be produced, but it cannot produce an offspring. And so we call that speciation, when a new species is formed. And to understand evolution, we have to understand DNA. DNA is a nucleic acid, and it is the blueprints that tell your cells how to make proteins. And proteins are what you're made of, and they are what do the jobs in your body. They carry the oxygen around in your blood. They act as pumps in your cell membrane to allow ions in or ions out. They are going to dictate what your eye color could be, or how tall you might be, or how short you might be, what your skin color will be. This proteins play a role in all of this. And when we look at all of your DNA, we are looking at all of your genome. And your genome is comprised of 46 chromosomes. If you look here is a chromosome. This is one chromosome. And we have 46 of those in our nucleus. We have 23 from mom and 23 from dad. And so when we look at just one chromosome, or one length of DNA, we can see here that there's going to be one section. One section of DNA is going to dictate how to make one protein, which will dictate one trait. So let's just say, for simplicity's sake, eye color. let's say that this right here, this section of this piece of DNA is going to code for your eye color. And so we're going to call this a gene. So your genes, there are many genes on each chromosome. And very simply put, one gene, one protein, one trait. And we get two sets of genes, so 23 from mom and 23 from dad. So we have one version from mom and one version from dad. We call each version an allele. And here, let's talk about eye color again. If we are looking at our eye color traits, this would be a blue eye trait, little b, and this would be a brown eye trait, big B, little b. And so if we look at all of the versions of, or both versions of each gene, we're looking at our genotype. And this is how it's expressed. Little b, big B, big B. This is what we have in our genes. If we look at what is actually expressed, we're looking at our phenotype. And so the phenotype, in this case, would be expressed as the brown eye trait, or you have brown eyes. And so genotype is what you have in your genes, and phenotype is what is expressed. And so what is expressed here is the dominant allele, and the dominant allele is brown eyes. People often mistake that our DNA plays the only role in dictating what we become and who we are, but environment plays a very large role in that as well. Two interesting examples of this in nature. Here is, we have turtles. I like to think of turtles as cool dudes and hot chicks because they have temperature-dependent sex determination. And so the eggs, while they are in the nest, depending on the temperature of the eggs, this determines their gender. So this is one way that environment is going to affect the outcome of an organism. And so that's not dictated by genes at all. Another example of this is the water flea. If the scent of a predator is in the water while water fleas are hatching, then the water flea will look like this. And if it is not in the water, then it will look like this, which is pretty cool. That's such a drastic outcome for your environment to play a role in. When looking at our DNA, we have to keep in mind that it's replicated millions of times throughout a lifetime. And it's not always done successfully. In fact, there are many, many mutations or errors in copying our DNA. And if it happens to the sperm or the egg of an organism, that mutation can be passed on. If it happens to you, and let's say you're sitting out in the sun too long and you have mutations in your skin because of the sun, and it results in skin cancer, that's not a mutation that you can pass on to your offspring. The mutation has to be to the sperm or the egg for it to be passed on. And sometimes mutations can be deadly, and this can lead to miscarriages. This is why we see so many miscarriages happen, because there's something wrong with the genetic material, and there's a mutation, something's not right, and the baby can't survive. Sometimes it's no big deal. Sometimes mutations happen, and oftentimes they happen, and it can lead to something like male pattern baldness. It can also lead to other simple things like maybe your fingernails grow quickly, maybe they grow slowly, maybe you're a little bit taller, maybe you're a little bit shorter. Those are all can be the result of mutations. Sometimes they can be problematic. We can look at the example in nature of the conure. In the jungle, it's good to be green because you want to blend in with trees. And so here we have a single gene mutation where the bird ends up becoming blue. And while I think it's pretty, it also makes the bird more conspicuous and therefore easier prey to catch. And so this is problematic. It's going to reduce its probability of producing an offspring. Most of the times, mutations are detrimental, but sometimes it can be beneficial. And if it is beneficial, we call this an adaptation. An adaptation increases the fitness of an organism to survive long enough to pass on its genes to an offspring. An example of this, an example of a beneficial mutation or an adaptation that we're seeing in nature right now, is the Aedes mosquito. The Aedes mosquito is the mosquito that carries the Zika virus and the dengue fever. And so we humans will often spray an insecticide called pyrethroid, and it will kill off the mosquito. However, this has consequences. If we use it too much, then, which we have apparently, because the mosquito is developing a mutation. There was a single gene mutation, which a sodium pump or an ion pump is no longer taking in the insecticide, and it's no longer killing the insect. And this is happening all around the world except for Australia, who has very strict regulations on chemical use for insects. So we see that we see mutations happening all the time, and we are seeing how they can be beneficial and how it kind of turns into a race for us against mosquitoes. When talking about DNA, we also have to talk about recombination. This is going to allow for more genetic diversity. If we go back in time to learning about meiosis, we remember crossing over. Crossing over happens during prophase 1, where the chromosomes separate and they wrap around each other so tightly that they swap genetic material. And this is going to allow for new combinations of genes to happen and for more genetic diversity. And so genetic diversity through evolution is going to occur through 3 ways. Artificial selection, natural selection, and random processes. These are the 3 driving forces of evolution. A lot of times people hear the word natural selection and they use it synonymously with evolution, but these are 2 different concepts. Natural selection is one force that drives evolution, and evolution is a change in species over time. And so let's first talk about evolution through artificial selection. There's some cool examples of evolution through artificial selection. One famous one is dogs. So we know from our past classes that all dogs used to be wolves, and we can see microevolution here through selective breeding. So we choose the traits that we want to see. And so if we have a bulldog that has aggressive behavior but is quick and small, and we have a mastiff here that is large and strong but slow and not aggressive, there are traits in both dogs that we want. And so if we combine those 2 traits, we create a bull mastiff, which is a large and quick, strong, and aggressive dog. So we have artificially or chosen the traits that we want to see, and it has resulted in a change in the species over time. Another example of this is from the ancient, it's not ancient, we still have it, wild mustard. In fact, it's now a weed, a pretty cumbersome weed in gardens to get rid of. But we have created many crops from this wild mustard through small changes, through selective breeding over time. This is now our Brussels sprouts, our cauliflower, our broccoli, cabbage, etc. And so the ancestor to all of these is the wild mustard.